Alright, hello everyone. So today we've got our third lesson on the Prelude, where we're going to be talking about the end of the poem. So our learning objective today is to explain the shift in imagery after the Volta and why it leads to a sense of blank desertion, that quote directly from the poem. We should remember what a Volta is, this big change. We've seen what a nice time Wordsworth was having in the first part of the poem. Maybe we have some ideas about what's going to happen in the second part. So please get that down if you haven't already. And to go with this title and this objective, we've of course got some versatile vocabulary that we're learning today and that we've seen before. Harmony and disruption, new today. Those are going to be useful. Those might help us to talk about that Volta. Sublime, experience, vulnerable, emotional, intangible and internal. These are all words that actually a lot of people are really confident with, that I think will be useful for talking about Wordsworth's poem. So let's just have a quick reminder of those, get those back into the front of your mind so we can use them when we start writing and talking about Wordsworth in a minute. So all I'm going to do in this video is introduce three key quotations that I think help show us what happens in the second part of that poem. So we remember he stole the boat, he was rowing along across the lake with his eyes fixed upon one particular mountaintop. Maybe I didn't explain so brilliantly last time, but he's actually moving away from that mountain. His eyes are fixed on it as if he owns it, as if he's committed to it, but he's moving in a direction away from it. And he's happy, he's having a good time. But suddenly, what happens as he's rowing backwards, he sees that behind this lower mountain top there's a much higher one here. And maybe you can faintly see my pencil line there, that his eyesight can now see that top part of the mountain. When he was here, he wouldn't be able to see it, it wouldn't be visible to him, but now he's a little bit further back, he can actually see it. And this is a huge peak, black and huge. That's what we're looking at, a huge peak, black and huge. And I'm going to get into annotating that. Before doing so, I've written the word Volta up there because I think it's so important. This is the moment of the Volta in the poem, the moment of change, of turn, of moving from one thing to another. And to give you a sense of what that could be, I would say at the start of the poem, the tone, the feeling of what's going on would be innocent and controlled. You know, he says things like, I unloosed her chain. But now, this becomes submissive and fearful. So a very different state of things. So that's what we need to connect when we're thinking about this moment of the poem. We're also thinking about the Volta and the change that is going to come. So when he sees this second mountaintop, this higher one, he's really stunned by it, and he's so taken aback. He says this word huge twice. We're talking about someone who is, you know, one of the greatest English poets there ever was, yet he's somehow so stunned, the only word that he can use is huge, which is a perfectly good word, but not one that's especially sophisticated, and he uses that over and over again, or twice in that particular case. So clearly, I think it's fair to say, it's a bit like an obsession again. I think he was obsessed with the lower peak, but now he's got a new obsession, which we see through that repetition. But this time it's not so much an obsession with connecting with something or owning something, but it's actually a very strange obsession with something that's impossible to control. It's getting into his mind, and we'll see that more and more as the poem goes on. This mountain that he gets obsessed with absolutely making a big impact on the growth of his mind. And what we get from this second part of the poem is the way that he's terrified, like he's really scared. He's really upset by the sight of this mountain, and we've had that brilliant word disruption, haven't we, today? Clearly this is a moment of disruption when he sees a huge peak, black and huge. So I might even put a sort of in a thought bubble up here, because it's about so much of what we're looking at. Disruption as being one of the ways I would describe what's going on here. We've also got this peak. That's what he's focused on, that's what he's looking at. We're obviously still in the realm of nature, and we're also in the realm of the tangible still. Something tangible, but impossible to control. Something that maybe could be touched, but that which will not be controlled by this small human being. And when we see that word black to describe it, that's maybe another word with huge that tells me he's experiencing this sort of obsession and this terror from this enormous mountain, or this bigger mountain. When we think of the word black, of course you might think of funerals, you might think of death. That's one reason it might be such a terrifying thing. Maybe this is a kind of figment of imagining death. That's what it summons up. It could also, in its sort of blankness and its size, maybe be something like God. Though maybe that's from the hugeness as well. So I might do a double arrow there. That kind of the absence of any features seems that it becomes a kind of power that could be like God. But maybe, even if you didn't think it represented any one thing, we can definitely say it has a kind of intangible power. Which again, I get that from the word black, and I get that from the word huge as well. And you can see I've sort of set up a bit of a contradiction there. I've said that it's a tangible thing, this peak, something we can point at, we can touch, we can get a hold of. But actually it's also got this intangible power. And it's that intangible power which I would say makes it impossible to control. That makes it terrifying and scary. That combination of things, of something tangible and intangible, for me takes us into the realm of the sublime. That concept we've learnt about that's so important for Romanticism. And I might just put a couple of extra ideas there to express how that's about feeling inferior to nature. That's certainly what's going through Wordsworth's mind at this moment in the poem, his inferiority to nature. But it's not just inferiority, it's this kind of internal disruption that's going on as well. So second time I've put that on the page, so obviously it's important. There's more ways we could talk about the sublime here, but those would be two key points. That this experience, he's finding he's inferior to nature, he's experiencing an internal disruption, and that tells us he's having something that could be described as a sublime experience. And that really carries on throughout the whole rest of this section of the poem, and only gets deeper and deeper as we go on towards the end and towards that blank desertion that we saw later. So a few lines later, he describes this mountain appearing to him like a living thing. So we've got to imagine him rowing backwards and further away from the mountain, but when he looks at it, it's as if this huge thing is coming after him, coming to get him. And if it's living, and I think maybe I want to start with that word thing rather than living. If it's a thing, it's not an animal, it's not a person, it's not a boat, or it could be a boat, but is not sure what it is. It's living, but there's something unknown about it. If you describe something as just a thing, it has an unknown quality to it, something that's confusing or disruptive. There's something puzzling about it. But the fact that it's living clearly makes it feel like he's being chased. And if he's being chased, we're getting a sense of guilt going on here as well. That he's obviously feeling bad about something, or even if he hasn't done that much that's wrong, what could he have done wrong? He's stolen the boat. Could that be it, that he's feeling guilty about that? Could he feel bad that he's maybe having something like a sexual experience for the first time? Will that cause him guilt? It has done in many cases over history, so this might be one of them. It could be either of those, it could be something else. If these are the kinds of things chasing him down, maybe we do want to start thinking about what kind of a living thing this could be. Like, what kind of person would make you feel guilty for something that you've done that's not too bad, that's only natural, whether that's his sexuality or even stealing the boat. Neither of these things are particularly bad. We could probably identify this with parents, maybe. Parents or older people. You know, this is still a young person, remember. Or again, we could talk about it as God. That would be another way of seeing this. Wordsworth, a very religious person, it could definitely be God. Maybe before we go on, I just want to put in one more word to go with chaste from our brilliant memory banks of versatile vocabulary, and that's the word vulnerable. So you remember at the start of the poem how powerful he felt, how he was taking clear and decisive action. Now it's clearly the opposite thing. He's become vulnerable, he's become isolated, he's feeling scared. It was totally different at the start of the extract that we read. So this moment is a kind of deepening of that emotional intensity. And it just gets deeper and deeper until we get to the very end of the poem, where he has this little reflection. And he talks about how for days and days afterwards he kept thinking about unknown modes of being, and in his mind there hung a darkness, call it solitude or blank desertion. And here, this is the blank desertion hanging in his mind persistently. And that feeling of something hanging there, it isn't something that's tangible. It's this weird mix of tangible and intangible again. But I'm going to put it down as perhaps an intangible experience. If it hung there, maybe there's like a presence, but it's like a thought that you can't get out of your mind, or a song that you just can't stop humming the chorus to because you've heard it so much. This is an experience he's had that he's continued to be obsessed with. Whatever's happened, it's not leaving his mind, whether he's chosen to or not. He might be wanting to get away from it. He might be wanting to forget everything that he's seen that night. But it's not letting him go. It's not letting him free. We've talked a little bit about darkness already. That feeling of the black mountaintop as being something to do with death. But now this could just be sadness, couldn't it? It doesn't have to be something as terrible as death. It could just be a kind of profound sadness or depression that somehow come out of this experience. And I think we've been talking about his vulnerability and how he's become isolated. Maybe he didn't say that explicitly before, but now he does. If he's in a state of solitude or blank desertion, being left totally on his own, being deserted, he's been left totally alone. Like that statue in Ozymandias, if you like. Maybe he was surrounded by friends and family before, or he was surrounded by nature before, but now there's nothing but him and the universe. Him and the universe in this terrible abyss of sadness and blankness around him. And I'm saying these things because it takes us back again to the sublime, which I haven't already written down, but I'll do it now. We're pushing back to an experience of the sublime. And it's not just the moment he saw the mountain that gives him this. It's the way he's haunted by it for so long afterwards. Just being completely alone in the world with this encounter with unknown modes of being. All he can think about is how small he is, perhaps how melancholy and sad he is, but it's changed his perspective totally. So I think that's a great example of a sublime experience. So we're going to go back to the lesson now, where you can take some time to copy down these notes more fully.